Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I have a very special guest joining me. My friend Fred Aebli has decided to be a part of our podcast because I begged and pleaded for him to join. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things today. But before we get into that, Fred, I have known you personally for years, so I know you have 20 years of education behind you. But do you want to give people a little hello and explain to those who don't know you, who are listening to the podcast, what it is you do for a living?
Sure thing. And it's good to be here, Crystal. Thank you. So I've been, my background is very windy, I guess. But for the past 21 years, I've been teaching in higher education in the United States, and I found myself teaching in the technology space. So I am doing something that I've always wanted to do in terms of working with technology, but I'm doing something that I never expected to be doing if you had told me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So a little bit about my background. I'm a former military member. I'm a former U.S. Marine. I also have some consulting that I do, but most importantly, or not most importantly, I'm a father. I think that is most important. I'm a father and I'm a husband. So I have 3 children. One is out of college. The other 2 are college age. So I've learned a lot from them. But along the way, I've also gotten inspired by helping young people explore or become interested in technology and in particular coding, which is software programming. So that's what I've started to get me coding. So I don't know if that's a good intro or is that
that is a great intro. And let's be clear, it's getmecoding.com for those who want to check it out. And Fred is a wonderful resource for anyone who has children in their life, regardless of whether they're your own children or not, because Fred is a great gift to give people as, Christmas presents and birthday presents, because it's actual skills that can help children. But he also puts together a fantastic list at Christmas time of coding gifts you can buy for the children in your life that are not just fun, but also genius at teaching kids all of these skills that, old fogies like me don't necessarily have.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. That's the STEM gift giving guide. So STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math. Some may know it also as STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And every year for the past several years, I've scurried about the internet looking at toys. Some of the toys, I know people can't really see what's going on, but behind me, they could see I'm a big fan of toys, coding toys, science fiction, Star Wars. But I always look for those kind of toys because as a kid growing up, I found myself every year going underneath the Christmas tree and opening up gifts, and there would always be some kind of educational toy that shaped me in one way or another. And that was my mom's doing because unfortunately my dad had passed away when I was very young. So my mom and I spent a lot of Christmas mornings together. I do have a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles, but my mom would put that kind of package or gift underneath the tree. So I get it how it plants a seed, but I also get that as a parent, there's so much out there, and you just said it yourself. You don't put yourself down like that. I know that you said that you're a newbie or you're learning it. We're all learning. I think even those people that feel like they've arrived, they know that they're still learning. So there's always a path here you're traveling down. But I love putting that guide together. And if anybody comes out, I'd be more than willing. They could still download it. But going into next year, for the 2021 Christmas season, we'll be doing it again, and it'll be out there as a download. And I kind of evaluate them, and I picked my top ones by age group because I think obviously, kids have different interests at different ages and different skill sets. Sure. But it's a fun thing to put together. And I try some of them out, and I also read a lot about them, or I'll talk to other people, their parents who've purchased them, and I'll find out, what did they like or not like about it. And oddly enough, it's funny you bring this up. I just got an email. I'm not going to get into the detail yet, but I was another toy manufacturer reached out to me and asked if I would review one of their programmable robots. Yeah. And I love that because I get to play with it. And, there's nothing better than being a 52-year-old kid. So
that's fantastic. And I love it. And I love that you brought that up because you're right. There's absolutely nothing wrong with us being giant kids at heart. And I know because you and I have coffee on a weekly basis.
Yes, thank you.
Through Zoom during this pandemic, Fred has started a morning coffee on Saturday mornings where we talk a little bit about technology or different things things that, maybe people are unaware of. But then we also have some pretty fun discussions as well. So I am very well versed in Fred being able to enjoy life like a child. And it's a wonderful reminder weekly just to do that. Sometimes we get talking about Disney. Sometimes we get talking about just life in general. So anyone who is looking for that can check that out on Fred's Get Me Coding community on Facebook as well.
Yeah, thank you.
While we're talking about that, Fred, I know I mentioned getmecoding.com, but do you want to just let people know if they're, looking to get in touch with you for some reason or join the Facebook community? How's the best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, so they're find me on the web. So I am at getmecoding.com. If you go out to that page, it will take you out to my Facebook and YouTube channel. But everything is under Get Me Coding. So on YouTube, we're under Get Me Coding, which I would love to have people subscribe, and you can find a bunch of tutorial videos out there. And also on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Get Me Coding, where if you're over there, I would love, and Crystal knows, like, we would love to have you come into our community. We have a private group. It's a nice group of people. And you're right. We talk about everything. And there's a really interesting coding conversation going on right now. And one of the questions that came up was, what do I need to know about there now? And I'm doing what I do almost every day. And that's get people to understand that anybody could begin learning to code. And you don't need to be a math major, and you don't need to be some kind of genius scientist type mentality, But yeah, they could find me there. And when you come over to the Facebook page, you could join the community. Like I said, we'd love to have you come in. And then also, you were talking about the Saturday mornings. Yeah, we get together, and I was just meaning to go back and look at the time frame, because we're rapidly approaching our year anniversary of gathering. And I cannot believe that. I mean, we started it and I say we, because you have been one of the consistent people that shows up every Saturday. You've been there every Saturday. You've just been such a faithful and great friend to have in that group, always contributing, always smiling, always interacting with us. And that's so huge. That's so important to me. But it's something we started, right? We do Saturday mornings, 10 a.m., coffee, computers, and coding, we call it. And we talk, we play a Kahoot, right? We do a weekly trivia game.
Yes.
And it's what it's become. I don't did it because everybody was locked up, right? And I wanted a way to kind of get together with people, because we were finding ourselves disconnecting with people. And then it's just kept on going. And I'll be honest, there was a period of time where I'm like, you know what, I'm probably gonna have to shut this down, because it's summertime. People are gonna want to be out in the morning, Saturday mornings.
Right.
Well, it feels like we kind of like I don't know what the analogy would be, but like kind of like this boat going through a very turbulent or shallow sea for a moment, like it was going to run aground or something. We kept on going, and so here we are. We're back, through the last summer, through the fall, now in the spring, and we're getting ready to go into the next summer. And I'm just going to keep on going. And as long as folks like yourself are interested in gathering, I think we keep on doing it. It's fun.
Awesome. I'm excited to hear that, because I love starting my Saturday morning with you guys. Even when we have new people jump in, the conversation tends to flow very easily. And there's always something, you bring something that I learn every week, whether it's about coding or computers. When you introduced Kahoot, I was like, I have no idea what this is, but it's the most fun part of our Saturday morning conversations. Like, it's a wonderful way to start the weekend and sort of de-stress from whatever may have happened during the week too. So
yeah, that's what it's become. I mean, the prep that I do for it is really, really light in terms of what other people do for the prep for gatherings, I suppose, building the Kahoot and whatnot. But all you do is grab a cup of coffee, click the Zoom link and you're in. It's I guess really what I was trying to create was a space like a coffee shop space.
Right.
I know that not everybody's a coffee drinker, and that's okay. You don't have to be. You could be a juice drinker, water drinker, whatever. But you could come in and you just kind of hang out for a little bit. And what I always tell people too is you don't have to even stay the whole hour. If you just want to pop in and pop out, that's cool too. You could just say hi and see everybody. And that was what we were trying to mimic. And I think it's been pretty successful. I'd like to think it's, as long as people find value in it, I'll find value in it. So that's awesome.
Wonderful. And that actually brings me to a question that I have for you, because I know you personally. What got you into teaching? Because not only do you teach professionally at a university, but you are teaching kids. You are teaching the next generation what technology is, how to use it. How did that become your passion?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've told this story many ways, but you just framed up the question in a different way, and it may evoke a different answer. So teaching is, I think, it's a call to service, and I think when I look back in my life, and if I pick apart everything, and I can lay it out here in a second, everything I've been doing has had a service element to it. I'm not saying I'm the perfect community member, but that's what I do. I tend to like to get involved. I volunteer. So if I walk backwards a little bit, when I was a kid growing up, I was always involved in my church youth group. And then after that, I got involved with other clubs in high school. I was a class officer. I kind of got involved in that aspect of organizing events. And then when I went to college was different. I was somewhat involved, but I was getting ready to go into the military. So I spent 4 years studying computer science math. And then I went into the Marine Corps, which, when I look at the reasoning why I got into the Marine Corps, I really wanted to be an astronaut. And that was more self-serving. That's not really a service, but yet going in the military is serving your country. And I always had a firm belief of giving back to the country that gave me so much, and that's the United States. So, I look at that, and then all of a sudden, the way the real story goes is, as I had left active duty, I was completing my active duty requirements, and then I was in the reserves while stationed and working. I was now working for a company called Bell Atlantic in the Baltimore, Maryland area. So Bell Atlantic just put their new regional headquarters in Baltimore, the Regional Engineering Center. And while I was there, I got to know this fellow. His name was Rick Spence. And if Rick Spence is out there listening to this, I would love to hear from you. We have not talked now for almost 20 years. But he was an older gentleman. He had been with Bell Atlantic for, I believe, I want to say 40 years or 35 years at that time. He was just a tremendous guy. He was a Baltimore. I don't want to say Baltimorean. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but he was a Baltimorean. He knew the city. He was from Baltimore, born and raised in Baltimore, and so he took me in under his wing. But while he took me under his wing, the one thing he said to me, he told me about, was that he was teaching at night. And I said, that's interesting. He goes, would you like to? I'm like, yeah, I'll give it a try. So he began to look into it, and he was going to reach out to one of the schools right there in Baltimore. And then at the same time, things changed, and I moved up to the Northeast, back to Pennsylvania, where I'm from originally. While I was working on a project, about 3 years later, once you get, when you change a project over, you're getting to know your new job. But while I was there, our project started to downsize. So I wasn't living too far from my original college campus, so I drove there, and sure enough, my old computer science professor was still working there.
Wow.
It was that night he there because he was always there, and I was sitting there, and we had just a great moment of catching up. And then he asked the question. He said, "How would you like to teach a nighttime class?" Now, I'm developing software full-time, which was a full-time job as a software developer. I was still single, so I had no problem putting in the 80 hour plus work week. It was just what you did. And, when he said, do you want to teach an evening class? I knew my project was downsizing. I really didn't know what was going to be happening, but it was still a stable job. But I took the evening job to teach. So I taught a class on management information systems. So it was really a class on advanced PowerPoint. Now, I always joke about that, and I always say, what's advanced PowerPoint? PowerPoint's PowerPoint. But at the time, it was new. It was a new software tool. This is also like 1998. And the internet was just starting. So what you were starting to see were people looking to reinvent themselves. A lot of adult learners. Sure. that were wanting to go back to school for a 2-year degree or possibly a 4-year degree if they had the time. And so they were taking that class. I taught the class. We ran it through the spring semester. I really enjoyed it. It was cool because not only did I know how to use PowerPoint, so it was like breathing air. I mean, I'm in a classroom environment where I'm really just giving them all of my knowledge, but everything I was giving them was within the framework or the I don't know what you want to call it, like the context of real world examples. Like I wasn't doing anything at all out of a book. Everything was, we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation and here's the scenario. And the scenario would be, I would think about when I had to brief a colonel in the Marine Corps, or I had to think about when I had to talk to a local community or, little things like that. So anyway, at the end of the course, it seemed like it really went well. I got a lot of nice feedback and comments from the students. And then at the same time, when the course ended, we kind of said our goodbyes to my professor, but then he reached back out to me. He says, we have a brand new degree starting up. How would you like to apply for it? And at that moment, it was one of those moments where you're like, really? You want me to be a college professor? Like, I am not the guy that needs to be a college professor. But my project was downsizing. I just met my wife. I really wanted to stay in the area that I was from. Sure. And I said, sure. What do I have to do? Well, you have to submit your vita. And I'm like, what's a vita? I mean, in the academic world, the vita is the thing, right? In the business world, it's the resume.
Right.
And I had a resume, but I then I did it. I had to give a presentation, a classroom presentation, or a presentation on what a class might be with me. And I had to do that in front of other professors. And I had another number of conversations. And sure enough, I got offered the job. And I never expected to get the offer. I don't know why. I'm not saying I was being negative or hard on myself, but I didn't think I was going to get the job. And what that did is it allowed me to then kind of get involved with, trying to, see what this next step would look like. And the next step was going to be, trying to be a professor. And I was thinking about all the professors that I had, good and bad. Sure. And sure enough, I ended up taking the position. And I'll never forget the conversation. I had to leave work early. I was still working at my other job. I had to leave work early to take the call with the offer. And I remember driving down the road and sitting in my car. And I was coming out of the hourly rate world. As a software developer, we billed out by hour, and we paid for our own benefits, and we did our own retirement. I mean, it was purely hourly. And all of a sudden, I'm going to this salary gig, and I'm like, do I really need healthcare benefits? This and yes, that's part of your pack because I go up, But all in all, I took the position. I began teaching that following fall. So that was, like I said, I taught in the spring. We wrapped up in, we went through that in the summertime months, and then I took the position in the fall. And sure enough, it was one of those things where I've been there ever since. It's been a great routine for my family and for me.
Well, and I think it so suits you because I know you personally. You light up when you talk about teaching. You light up when you talk about your students. You light up on Saturday morning coffee when a student pops into the room, even if you haven't seen them in, 10 years. So I think it was kismet. It was certainly meant to be because you're perfect at what you do.
Well, thank you. And it's definitely a craft. When I went into teaching, I really was building on my experience. So, when I entered the college classroom, what did I have really to bring forward? I had, first of all, I was doing some very, very heavy duty software programming. I was doing some stuff with the Oracle database technology. We were doing first ever internet style applications. I was learning, so much so fast. And like I said, I was working 80-hour weeks, 5, 6, 7 days a week, actually. And then prior to that, I was also learning. And then in the Marine Corps, I had learned a lot about leadership, and I was doing IT systems a little bit there too. I had gone back to school, I had an advanced degree. But then when I also got out, the other thing I didn't say, when I was working on software, I started my own consulting because I had this feeling that I wanted to have this business idling on the side in case something dried up, something ended. Sure. And so I've been doing that. And so I taught myself. So there was a lot of midnight oil being burned, in those years when in my 20s and 30s, where I was just constantly, the routine you're doing yourself. But it's one of those things where I was learning. So that's really what I was taking to the classroom. But I didn't know how to be a teacher. The only thing I knew how to be a teacher was, what I was trialing and erroring as a dad. I mean, there is no dad handbook or parent handbook. You learn as you just roll with it, and you just call upon examples of people in your lives. Sure. And that's what I did with teaching. I thought about my favorite professors. What did I like about them? And I don't mean like, when I say like, I don't want it to sound like, how many of them gave me an easy grade or
right.
It was what made me want to learn, what made me engage in the classroom. And so I drew upon that. And I also countered it with examples of professors that I just thought were horrible. I mean, the professor that just kind of got up in front of the lectern and talked straight for 50 minutes, or the professor that was never in his office when you needed help. but I learned how to create, for if there's teachers listening, right? I learned to create rubrics and assessments, and I learned to create good syllabi. And then ultimately I learned how to communicate differently in the classroom. And so so I said it was a craft. It's a craft that I know that I have not arrived. I've been so fortunate to receive some academic awards for my team, but I really, though the awards belong to my students because they're the ones who made me the better teacher. Like they students are an amazing thing. Like you see that you're going to give them something of yourself. Really, that's what it comes down to. It's a very giving profession, and then it blossoms and they take it in a totally different direction. That's amazing to me. And I've said that before in some other interviews, but I'll say it again that teaching is one of those professions that allows you to give back, but it's, that you're preparing people to go back into the community to make communities better. Right. And in a time now, I'm not saying I'm the example or the perfect person, but like at a time now more than ever when we need better communities, teachers have such an incredibly important role. And I hope we embrace that, here as we come out of this academic year, because we have to recognize them. We really do. And it doesn't have to always be just a pay. I'm sure pay raise would be nice, but it's just how about putting them at the front of the line for a change? You know what I mean? Just putting them we hold so many people up high in our society that we really don't recognize the people that are so crucial in our society either. So.
Absolutely. And I think that raises two things that I want to talk about. But before we get into that, I think you're 100% right. And if we've learned anything this year, it's that we need to have a little bit more respect as a society for the people who are raising the next generation, the people who are teaching them what we want them to know to be better than we were or to do better than we did when we were younger. And I think there's, especially here in Canada, I know I'm in Canada, you're in the States, and things are a little bit different, but we typically here in Canada have a teacher strike in one of the provinces every year. It's a different province. It's different things that they're striking about, classroom sizes and, workload and, resources that get taken away or whatever it happens to be. And my hope is coming out of this, people will look at that all a little differently, especially because teachers have struggled to keep kids engaged this year. Here in Canada, we've had so many lockdowns that most of the last 12 months have been online learning for all ages. And teachers have had to navigate that. Even teachers who aren't familiar with technology had to figure out a way to make it work. And it brings me to the question of, you've had to adapt. I know, because you and I have personally had these conversations. So from a teacher standpoint and a personal standpoint, how have you navigated this whole change over the last year dealing with COVID and education?
Boy, another great question. It's hard. It's hard. So I'm a techie. I love to fiddle around and fidget with software and hardware, and that's my thing. But it's I kind of akin it to walking a tightrope without a net. And I think that's the one thing that we were all finding in agreement as teachers, and that is been this constant message of letting our students know that it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
And that was an important first step. It also meant if I screw up this software video call, don't worry about it. I'll see you next class. Or right. if I can't share this PowerPoint or play this video or teach this lesson in a way that I would normally be able to do it without even a second thought in the live classroom, don't worry about it. So so there was that part. But then there was really the other aspect of it is you're speaking to me and you see me every Saturday in the room. That has been my classroom for the past year. I'm in a, so it's kind of painting a picture for everybody listening. I am in my home office, and there's a convenience, obviously, to all this, right?
Sure.
I'm teaching in my shorts and my bare feet some days, and nobody knows that. But
right.
But like in trying to learn software while you're trying to teach is challenging. So normally, like the routine, and every teacher knows this, is you do your prep. So the preparations for a class take place sometimes months before, but maybe not always. Maybe it's the night before. But you're finding yourself kind of doing more prep than ever before, making sure things are laid out better, And then there's the investment. Some of us have made investments in devices and early on, right? There was no microphones. You could buy a microphone anywhere. Webcams were like a premium. People were turning old cell phones into webcams.
Exactly.
And, so there was that stress too. But, I'm not saying that school districts weren't supportive or my university wasn't supportive. They for the most part, they were, but it was very stressful. So like, as you got through it, we get into this mode of teaching and I hear you talk about it on other podcasts, and I hope, other people take the lessons you're trying to share with them and about being in the moment and being intentional and, all of these wellness aspects. They're so crucial in this weird remote world because I find myself working all the time. I can't not walk by this office door without walking in here. It's like, it's always open. It's like, I should have a sign out front that says open 24/7 because it is, It has been. So I guess it's easy. A lot of people would say, well, you got to put up or state your expectations and put up your boundaries. Yeah. Those are great things. They're hard to do.
They are really hard to do, especially with a home office and a list of 900 things to do. And, students who depend on you and maybe struggling. And as a teacher, there are so many other things you worry about other than just, being a dad, being an entrepreneur, having a career. Then you've got, 30 students that you're worried about. And if so-and-so doesn't show up to your Zoom classroom, was everything okay? Did they have a connection issue? Is there something going on in their personal life? And so you deal with so much more than just a few things. 24/7 is not a surprise. And my guess is it's also part of the reason why you and a wonderful group of people created the Teachers Pep Rally podcast. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the other aspect I'll add into that is the student component. So we all know that this is a different world and we're all facing these stresses, but we're seeing it in the students. So, I'll share with you, and you already know this, but I'll share with your listeners. I lost my mom to COVID in last May. And that made this virus, which was so far away, the January before that, it was so far away. It's over on another continent. And then all of a sudden it takes the nearest and dearest person in my life away. So all of a sudden now it's real. And I had a number of incidences. We won't have to get into those right here, but I had some other incidences that made me realize how divisive this issue was. So now all of a sudden, I contract COVID and I'm still dealing with it. I'm still without smell and taste. It's slowly coming back. I did something the other day. I didn't tell you. I got acupuncture. We could talk about that another day. But awesome. So I'm trying anything to see if I can bring my energies back in alignment here. But the thing was, like, I would look at my students. So prior to getting COVID, I was looking at my students, and we were starting to see that they would be missing class, like you said, and you're wondering. And at the college level or the university level in the United States, we're not allowed to tell them to turn their cameras on. So they're checking in, if you want to call it that, is what I call the dark tiles. and there's nothing worse than teaching a bunch of dark tiles. Like, you're literally talking to yourself for an hour, So when you talk about engagement, that was the other thing that all of these teachers have been really trying to enhance, is our ability to engage, getting creative and using different tools and so on. Having seen students with this malaise, this disconnected look, which you did see in the Zoom calls for those that did turn their cameras on. Sure. And then now all of a sudden me going through it, I had a totally different perspective on it. I was like, wow, I get it. So when a student disappears for a week because his grandfather that lives with them has COVID, they don't feel like getting online because they're scared. Right. So I totally got it. Well, going back to the Teacher Pep Rally podcast now, in terms of that, a great friend of mine who you also know, Aaron King, we began to have some conversations, and our conversations were much like what we're talking about here, but also extrapolated a little bit more around education.
Sure.
She and I were saying, well, do you think other people would be interested in hearing what we're saying? Because we were talking as teachers, but our conversations were always revolving around how we care for our students. And, I'll be honest with you. I hate to say this, but I don't really remember too many teachers' conversations that I remember growing up talking about students.
Yeah.
And as a parent, the only time I got to talk to a teacher really was at the meet and greets or the evenings where you get to meet your teachers, and that was it. And I said, boy, wouldn't it be interesting if parents and other teachers can have a platform where they talk like human beings? And so we gathered up two other great teachers, Pete Bush, who's part of PSB Creative, and Letitia Jones, who's part of Project Ignited or Project Reignited. And we have 4 teachers. So they are all, of course, representing K through 12. I'm representing higher education, and we get together every week. And ever since we started this, now we've just completed, I believe, we're getting ready to go on our 28th episode.
Oh, exciting!
And yes, it is. It's exciting. I mean, we've been talking with so many, including people like yourself. You know that, right? You're one of our favorite guests to have on there. But we've talked with so many great teachers all across the country who are doing amazing things. And I said in a recent episode where we did a little bit of a reflection episode recently, because we didn't, I'll be honest with you, I don't think we all realized it'd be going consistently along this far right now, right? And I mean, I know that there's people out there with 800 episodes and 1,000 episodes, and so on, and you have a ton of episodes, but it was one of those moments where, what I think we're finding out is the podcast is actually helping us as much as we think it's helping other teachers.
Right.
And so we get together every Thursday evening, like clockwork. We welcome in another teacher or somebody involved in the educational space or the wellness space, like yourself.
Sure.
And we have these great conversations designed to uplift teachers who are in the thick of it right now. There's this one analogy that I've used when I lost my mom. I really, and having a military background, I really looked at the early stages of COVID as we were in a war, that we were pulled into a war that we weren't ready to fight. And I look at teachers being the same thing. Yeah. Teachers were pulled into this thing. Everybody becomes a teacher for their own reasons. And I think what you're hearing, sadly, is a lot of teachers are now questioning their reasoning. And they're wanting to leave the profession because they got pulled into doing something that they were not prepared to do.
And never trained properly how to do, sure.
And not at all. And I could tell you, as a former military member, there is nothing more frightening than being in a situation that you weren't prepared to be in. You do adapt, you do overcome. Great Marine Corps old phrase. But sure. The thing is, like when you're in it, it's a bone jarring experience, because you are seeing the fatigue of the students who you're there to help. You are trying to help education, and it's tough. It's tough. But the teacher pep rally was really created to uplift, and I like to think we're doing a good job of that, and we'll continue to do it. Even as we come out of this, I think as we come out of COVID and we kind of try to get back to whatever normal is in the future, we'll have that out there. I think, because I think teachers need a platform to advocate from, if that makes sense. Because I think they need a voice. And if we can help be that voice, I would be proud to do that. And I, like I said, I know my stuff. I play teacher. I sit down every week with teachers who are schooled and educated as educators. They went to formal education to become educators. And I'm so impressed by them. I mean, I learned so much. And that's what I really love about it. So it's been an interesting journey with the Teacher Pep Rally podcast. So if anybody's out there, you can find us, teacherpeprally.com, teacherpeprally.com, but you can find us on all the podcast platforms as the Teachers Pep Rally podcast. So,
and it's a fantastic podcast. I can attest. I am a few episodes behind, but I want to say, God, all the months melt together since COVID started. But I want to say like a month or two ago, you guys had a really great guest on who was just talking about how she has adapted to this crazy world that you as teachers are now trying to navigate, and how sometimes that means, one-to-one, she has a Zoom call privately with a student, outside of the classroom, if that's what's needed to help them, not just focus, but like feel like they're getting something out of their education, feel like they're connected as well. And I think just little things like that you guys are giving, not just educators. Like if you're listening to this podcast, you don't have to be a teacher to gain something from that Teachers Pep Rally podcast. I listen to it, I would say weekly, but I am a little bit behind on all my podcasts because I found this new Clubhouse app that's keeping me very busy, but that's a whole other podcast all on its own. But it's a great podcast. So I highly recommend everyone listening go and download it and check it out. And I'm grateful and happy to hear that you guys are going to keep doing it for as long as it continues to drive you, because you guys are a fantastic group of people. And I think the guests that you're having are fantastic and informative. And I think what you're giving, not just to educators, but to people in general, as far as conversation goes around how we learn, how we adapt, what that looks like, how painful it can be, but also how magical it can be, is wonderful. And those are the conversations I think we need to keep having.
Yeah, I mean, right from the first episode all the way through, there's a consistent thread, and that goes back to a phrase I learned from really Letitia. Letitia, if you're listening to this, you know what the phrase is. It's intentionality. It's being intentional. I really never understood what that meant. Being in the moment, obviously, that falls into your space. Just focusing on conversations. And if I could share just two takeaways with everybody,
Sure.
if they don't get a chance to listen to our podcast, which I hope they do, please do. Please subscribe to it. But it's clear, concise, and conversational in terms of communication. We bury each other in emails, and we're doing it to our students, especially at the higher level higher education level. If you're gonna utilize your digital tools like email, be clear, concise, and conversational. Nobody wants to be impressed that you can write a 8-paragraph email. Odds are no one's going to read it anyway.
Right.
But if that's going to be the case, call a meeting. Just do that. And that's a lesson that's been taught many, many years over. But it's good to be reminding everybody. But the other thing too is also, we're always in a rush. And if anything's happened during COVID, it feels like, even though this is something I always say, I've heard somebody else much smarter than I said this, that what was going to happen 5 years from now, COVID is now making it happen 5 minutes from now. It's like accelerator. Everything that was off in the distance, COVID is brought to the right to our front door. And just real quick, an example was like, I belong to a church in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and we finally got to stream our online masses. We had been talking about that for years, and we just were like, yeah, we'll get to it. Well, sure. COVID hits. Now we have to do it. So that's what I mean by if it was happening 5 years, it's happening now. I think the one thing though that is, the one takeaway, and it was especially shared with one of our guests, was the fact that conversations, we always want to, somebody wants our time. Some of us make these choices to say, hey, I don't have time right now. I got to go do this, or I'll get you later, or talk to you, but how many of us who have actually, had that opportunity, right, where we did stop and we held that, we helped that person out. And then in some conversation or some action later on, we find out that conversation we had with them made a huge difference in their life. And, I always say, like, some of us that have rushed off to that next thing, maybe it was to do a spreadsheet or get something in by a deadline. Odds are you're not going to lose your job, or, it's not that important. Right. It may feel like it's that important. But what was probably more important was the 5 minutes to spend with that student or that coworker or that family member or that friend, and then be in the moment. I mean, I think there's many phrases for that, but I think that we've convinced ourselves prior to COVID that we're just simply too busy.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm rethinking a lot of those type of things. I noticed my morning routine is significantly different now. And, I won't go into the gory details of it, but it's not a morning of get up, rush, get a coffee, getting onto the computer. I look out my window and I watch the sunrise, and I've shared pictures of that actually on my Instagram account. But I've gotten into morning prayers because I'm Christian, something that I've always wanted to do. But I meditate, but it all happens within a nice 45 minutes, 30 minutes in the morning, and nothing else. I mean, nothing. It's not impacting anything else. But in the past, I was thinking, oh, I got to hurry on and get this. But it's my moment, and then I think that's something else. Maybe that comes with getting older too. I don't know. But I hope people can find that peace, that inner space, that they can kind of be themselves and listen to themselves. I always teach it to my students. I say, here's your homework assignment. When you get in the car, if they were driving to campus or whatever, I say, when you get in your car and drive home, don't put the radio on. Don't put anything on. Just drive and listen to yourself for a bit.
Oh, I love it.
Would get every time students would come back. It's too hard. It's too hard. What's too hard about it? It's too quiet. It's too quiet. And so I challenge anybody, if anybody's out there listening to this, try that sometime. And I think you've shared that in a different way in another podcast of your own too. It's tough, right?
It is.
I call it the noise of the world. And I think the noise of the world keeps us from listening to ourselves. So Some thoughts.
Absolutely. And I love that piece of advice. And yes, absolutely. It is something that I try not to preach to people, but I think we need it preached a little bit because we get so used to the chaos of the world and the noise of the world, and we don't take the time to be with our own thoughts and our own feelings and process what that really is. So I love that you are teaching that to your students and at least giving them the opportunity to try it.
Yeah, it's funny. Here I am, a techie. I'm a former military guy, and I'm talking about what maybe someone would call woo-woo-ish, but it's not. It's it's funny. We go to the gym, we watch our diets. We always focus on this physical aspect of ourselves, but when it comes to the mental stuff, it always takes a back burner. I don't think I'm saying anything new to those people in the mental health space, but it just strikes me as something interesting. So as a university that I love working for dearly, I mean, and I'm an alumni of it. We always have a spring break, right? And because we were trying to keep people from traveling to avoid spreading any of this virus, we went to wellness days. So instead of doing a week off, we had 3 wellness days. And I think it was a great first attempt at introducing the concept of wellness. We have a website for it and all this good stuff. And so the intention is there's no classes on those days, and students are supposed to unplug and just kind of, I guess, be in the moment or think about doing something that can help themselves. But the one thing, though, that I've learned from people like yourself, once again, and just conversations even in our own community, right? Wellness is not a day-long event. It's a philosophy. Exactly. It's a life philosophy. So here I am as a techie, and I'm weaving in, I don't know what the phrase is, if is it humanistic elements? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm weaving that in the classroom. And somebody said, well, do you think you're qualified to teach that? I said, I'm a human.
Right? I don't think there's any more qualification than that.
Right. So, I mean, it's just interesting. So these are the things that COVID is, I guess on the one hand, COVID's been this dark, ominous, negative thing. And, but I try to find the glasses half full type perspective on this too. Sure. And what are we learning from this? And I think we still have a lot to learn. We still don't know what the future holds for us, but I think, if you put yourself in the right mind frame and kind of take advantage of this odd gift that we've been given, maybe we'll come out of this much, much better, so we'll see.
I love that. I hope that is true. I have such high hopes for the world learning the lessons from all of this, from, the struggles that have come to the wonderful, joyful moments. Like you've changed your morning routine. So moving forward, hopefully your morning routine, even when you end up back on campus, stays similar to what it has been, and you can still have that peaceful start to your day.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that was asked of me at a recent conference that I spoke at. What are the things that you will take forward with you into next fall? So in the fall of 2021, what from this remote world is working well that you can help bring forward? And I do know as a fact, the one thing is this ability just to be me. If I have students out there listening to this right now, some of my habits from the classroom. I've walked on desks. I've just to get attention. I've done all kinds of things, but I think there's being me in the classroom will be important. And I think that as I drive myself to my office or walk to my office or whatever it's going to be, they're going to be filled with moments of being in the moment and kind of embracing that and not being in such a hurry. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions. Do you tie a string around your finger? Do you set a reminder did you put a Post-it on your door? I don't know what it is, but if anybody has any thoughts on how they're going to remind themselves of these things. But I think it starts with a habit, right? I think it starts with, creating this habit such that you miss it and your body yearns it.
100%.
And that's the challenge. It's that training of the brain type thing. It's education. It's education in a nutshell.
Absolutely. I love that. I want to be really respectful of your time because it's almost 6. But I typically end all of my podcast interviews by asking 4 separate questions. So are you game to answer a few questions?
I'm always game to answer questions. You know that. I'm the king of trivia on Saturday mornings.
Well, these, I promise, are definitely not as hard as some of the trivia. But maybe they will be. I don't know. I guess it depends on who you are. So the first question is, if you could go back and give yourself any piece of advice at any point in your life, what would it be?
Boy, oh boy, that's a good one already. And we're good on time, so it's all up to you. But that person that I would go back to would probably be, I would probably go back to my teens, my not my teens, but my early college years, and just to remind me that everything will be okay. In other words, don't worry about it. Just keep moving forward. Don't hesitate. I don't know. I can go further, but that's the advice I would give.
I love that piece of advice. And I think it's great for anyone listening, regardless of age. So I love that. Okay, the next question is, what's one thing about yourself that you'd like? Oh, did you lose me? Are you there?
I just briefly, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Can you hear me?
So
okay.
I'm just going to say this for the podcast. Fred and I are obviously social distancing because Fred is in the United States and I'm in Canada. So if there are technical issues with the podcast, I apologize. I am going to edit as much of it as I can. And Fred and I will get back together if we have to, but just an FYI for everyone listening. Now that it sounds like we're reconnected, Fred, the next question is, what's one thing about... I
think we're good. Yeah, I think we're back.
Okay. So what's one thing about yourself that you would like to work on?
You know what? It's funny. I just posted a video on tips on how to deal with Zoom fatigue. And in one of the tips, especially for educators, it's to I don't know if you can hear me, but
I can.
What it is you anticipate the delay, much like we're having much of what we're happening right here. I have a habit of talking over people because I think I'm so excited. So
sure.
I want to work on, it goes back to being in the moment, just to saying, hey, let's hear you out. And that's what I definitely need to work on.
I love that.
Listening skills need to be worked.
I love that. But I also think it's awesome advice just in general for people, because we are certainly living in this digital world where sometimes an internet connection is a little bit slower, or it pauses, or the video isn't caught up to the audio, and these weird things happen. And sometimes you do in Zoom conversations or on FaceTime, you miss part of the conversation because of that. So I think that's wonderful. I love that answer. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. Best or worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Best or worst piece of advice I've ever been given? I would say I'll go with the best piece of advice. And the best piece of advice came from, a colonel that I worked with. And he was a dad. I was a young dad. He was an older dad. And I was lamenting over how much I was concerned with my daughters and my son going to school and ultimately, being influenced by bad influencers,
Sure.
And the advice that he gave me was, your job as a dad is to be the home base. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, all right, picture this. He says, take a glass of water, a clear glass of water. That's your daughter. That's your son. Now they go out to their school day. Now take an eyedropper of black ink and start dropping black ink into that glass. And all of a sudden the water starts to turn gray, and then it starts to get murky. And then all of a sudden it starts to get dark. He goes, that's how they come back to you. So when they come back into the house, now your job as the dad is you're there to purify the water. Now, wow. He said that, he goes, I'm not saying you beat the children or do anything like that. He says, but
sure.
You just remind them of what it means to be a good person, a giving person, a caring person, a helpful person. And I think that was one of the best advice I ever got as a young dad, considering, I grew up without a dad. I had my mom, who was a stellar anchor of a person to me. But that advice coming from another father was like, wow. And that stuck with me. And that advice was given to me over probably 35 years ago. Or no, 30 years ago. No, 25 years ago. Sorry.
You're aging your children. That's adorable.
Yes.
I love that piece of advice, though. That's such a fantastic piece of advice, because if we stop and think about all of the different things that children encounter in the course of a day, friends and, just people on the street and whatever it happens to be, they come home to where they can be filtered, where they can purify all of that negativity out of them and, sort of get reset at home base. I love that so much. I think that's a genius piece of advice.
Yeah, he was good. He was a good guy. And it's, I don't know, it's one of those moments that whole conversation sticks very clearly in my head. So it was a great moment for us to kind of share, for him to share with me. So that's the advice I would probably want to think back on.
Thank you for sharing that with all of us. I appreciate that. Okay, last question. And according to our friend Lou, this is the toughest question. So I will forewarn you. The question is, what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness. As a dad, I would say happiness is seeing my kids be happy. But I think happiness is where you get to be yourself, where you are allowed to, move around in this world unencumbered by what society imposes on you or what you think society imposes on you. And I think ultimately happiness rests in embracing that, but giving to others. I think when you give to others, it somehow reflects back onto you. And that's where the true joy comes from. And I always look at happiness and joy. They're not mutually exclusive. They are definitely tied together at the hip. But joy is something that you have to give away. Nobody could take it. You have to give it away. And I think happiness is when you are serving others and you are giving them something that makes them better, a better version of themselves, as we like to say. It comes back to you and it just builds you up and what it does for me, it resets me to do it again. And I think that's what true happiness is being in that cycle of giving. Because I think there's a lot out there right now that is deflating, and you can easily convince yourself that that happiness is an elusive thing that you can't find. But I think it's kind of like what we were talking about before. It's a habit that you have to get into. And if you can get into that habit of giving, it reflects back to you. It energizes you to do it again. And all of a sudden it keeps on spreading, kind of like a COVID-19 virus. You keep on spread it all around you. But I would think that's my definition of happiness would be, kind of giving to others. And I think that kind of ties back to my life of, service in whatever form I choose to give service through. So I don't know. He's right though. That's a tough question. Boy,
but I love your answer.
That, we'd all be a lot happier.
Hey, I love your answer. And I love that it is a tough question, because I think far too often we don't and ask ourselves, what is happiness and how do we personally define it? Because I think it does change. I think it changes for you as an individual as you go through your life. I think it changes based on whatever you happen to be experiencing at the moment.
I agree.
If I had asked you this question when your kids were in diapers, your answer would be very different than what it is today, right? So I think it's a fantastic question.
Yeah, because it would be I want 8 hours. It would be because I want 8 hours of sleep. That would be my definition of happiness. Or a full plate of food, one or the other.
I think every parent who's listening to this right now can totally relate with you. Well, I appreciate
sleep is like such a commodity.
Yeah. Well, especially in those early years, right? Eventually they get up, they take care of themselves. They can fend for themselves and you just stress about them. You don't worry so much about the sleep part.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Yeah, it's what do they say? Little kids, little problems. Big kids, big problems. So
yes, exactly.
It's all good.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Fred. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you agreeing to be here. I think you have absolutely given some very valuable information to everyone who is listening to this podcast. So before I let you go, can you remind people where they can find you?
Yeah, I would love to get to meet whoever's listening to this podcast, and they can come to me via the website, which is getmecoding.com. Find me on Facebook at Get Me Coding, and also on YouTube at Get Me Coding, Instagram at Get Me Coding, And I am on the Twitter. However, Twitter eludes me these days. But I am out there as Get Me Coding. And I would absolutely love to hear from anybody. And if anyone has any questions about beginning to learn to code, getting, young people involved or excited about technology, I would love to answer it. But also, if anybody has any questions, especially if you're in the United States, I think it's easier for me to answer the questions. If anyone has any questions about the mystery of higher education and how do you start a career in higher education, or how do you begin that process, or how do you get a young person motivated towards that goal too? I would be glad to share my insights, not only as a professor, but as a professor/dad. So I would love to hear from everybody.
That's so wonderful. Thank you very much, Fred. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you joined me on here. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And please reach out to Fred, and please download the Teachers Pep Rally podcast and hop over to getmecoding.com, because I cannot say enough good things about this man that I am now able to call a friend. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Crystal. It was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Thank you again, Fred, for joining me. I hope you all have an amazingly wonderful week. I thank you for being a part of this conversation and continuing to come back to the podcast week after week. I have included Fred's contact information in the show notes for this episode, so please get in touch with him. Please reach out to him. He is a fabulous human being, and I am grateful for the conversation we were able to have and to know him in this life. I hope you all have an amazingly wonderful week, and I will chat with you next week. Bye for now.